When Johnny Carson sat behind that desk under the studio lights, millions watched for laughter, never imagining the secrets some stars carried. In an era when being gay was often career suicide, a surprising number of Carson's guests quietly lived hidden lives. Only years later, long after the cameras stopped rolling, did the truth come out. These 9 entertainers, icons and heartthrobs of their day, would become LGBTQ+ figures, either late in life or posthumously, revealing the heavy price of fame in a less accepting time. Their stories span decades, from the golden age of 1950s Hollywood through the culture shifts of the 1980s, each reflecting the pressures and prejudices of its era. Liberace. Lee had nothing to be afraid of, except letting the world know he was gay. For millions of fans, Blasio Valentino Liberace was the king of sparkle. He stepped on stage wearing feather boas, glittering capes, rings that covered half his fingers, and suits so shiny they reflected the stage lights like mirrors. His piano wasn't just a piano, it was a full display piece with a silver candelabra glowing softly beside him, making every performance feel like a magical show. Liberace didn't just play, he entertained. He joked with the audience, winked, teased, and gave people a feeling of pure fun. Viewers loved him on The Tonight Show, and his concerts sold out across America because people genuinely adored his bright, over-the-top presence. But once the lights turned off, Liberace changed completely. Behind the glamour was a man who lived in constant fear. For decades, newspapers whispered about his sexuality, and he reacted by fighting back with everything he had. When a British tabloid hinted he was gay, he sued them and won. He insisted to the public that he was straight, even though privately he was deeply in love with a man named Scott Thorson. They shared a quiet, complicated relationship away from the cameras. Still, Liberace never stopped being afraid that someone would find him out. According to people close to him, he once admitted that his biggest terror was simple. His worst fear was that his fans would find out he was gay. Even on his deathbed, the fear lingered. Liberace made a pact with Scott and those around him to keep his illness private. He didn't want the world to know the truth. "I don't want to be remembered as an old queen who died of AIDS," he once confessed. A heartbreaking sentence that shows how heavy the shame and stigma of the time felt for him. The 1980s were filled with panic, misunderstanding, and open cruelty toward people with AIDS. For a star of his size, coming forward seemed impossible. When Liberace died in 1987, his official cause of death was listed as emphysema. But the autopsy told the truth he had worked so hard to hide. He had died from AIDS-related complications. The secret he had feared for so long was finally revealed. Looking back, Liberace's life feels both dazzling and tragic. He spent his whole career making people smile, yet he couldn't live openly as himself. His final chapter sparked conversations about AIDS, homophobia, and what it costs a person to hide their identity. Today, people remember his humor, his showmanship, his glittering costumes, but also the lonely burden of a man who felt he could never show the world who he truly was. Tab Hunter. In 2005, Tab Hunter sat at a table signing copies of his memoir, Tab Hunter Confidential. The room was quiet, the mood calm, and the man in front of fans looked very different from the bright 1950s star people once screamed for. Decades earlier, Hunter had been the clean-cut heartthrob of Damn Yankees and one of the most recognizable young actors in Hollywood. Studios shaped his entire image. They pushed him as the perfect boy next door, a polite, handsome, trustworthy young man who seemed safe for every American household. Teen magazines wrote about him constantly. His face appeared on countless covers, and he received piles of fan letters each week. But none of that attention showed what was really going on inside him. As he later wrote, he grew up full of denial. In the 1950s, even the smallest suggestion that an actor might be gay could destroy a career. So Hunter learned to stay quiet, avoid certain conversations, and live behind the persona the studio created for him. In his book, he explains that he felt unprepared for a world where any suggestions or questioning of my sexuality made him panic. Hollywood in that era demanded silence. If you wanted success, you played along. So he did what many others did at the time. He dated actresses for publicity, smiled for staged photographs, and went on talk shows like The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson, as if everything in his life was perfectly simple. Audiences only saw the cheerful singer and actor performing for millions. No one saw the pressure he carried or the constant fear that someone might expose the truth he wasn't ready to share. Privately, Tab Hunter was in love. The man he cared for deeply was another actor, Anthony Perkins, best known for his role in Psycho. Their relationship had to remain hidden, not because they wanted secrecy, but because the system around them left no choice. Two male stars dating in the 1950s was something the industry simply would not allow. Hunter lived most of his adult life keeping that part of himself out of the public eye. It wasn't until he was 74 years old that he finally decided to come out. By then, Hollywood had changed, society had changed, and he no longer felt trapped by the old rules. He went on to marry his longtime partner, living more openly than he ever could when he was young. Tab Hunter's story shows what it was like to be a perfect Hollywood boy during a time when being honest about yourself was dangerous. Behind the charm and the big smiles was a man trying to survive an industry that demanded lifelong silence. His honesty, later in life, reveals the cost of that secrecy and the relief of finally letting it go. Jim Nabors. Jim Nabors became famous by playing Gomer Pyle, the sweet, slightly clueless gas station attendant from the fictional town of Mayberry. The show's small-town setting, paired with Nabors' gentle voice and calm personality, made him one of the most comforting faces on American television. Audiences saw him as friendly, harmless, and full of Southern charm. His character was a symbol of innocence in a decade that wanted family-friendly entertainment. Away from the bright studio lights, however, Nabors lived a completely different life. He grew up in Alabama, a place where conversations about sexuality were often avoided, especially for men who wanted to maintain a traditional public image. Even after he became a well-known actor and singer, he continued living quietly, avoiding the kind of attention that could expose parts of himself he wasn't ready to share. On The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson, Nabors always appeared calm and polite. He talked about work, his music, and the show, never his personal relationships. People close to him later explained that his friends had known for many years that he was gay, but Nabors himself never confirmed anything publicly. He believed it was safer to stay silent, especially during the 1960s when America still held very conservative views. For a man whose career depended on a wholesome image, even a rumor could have caused trouble. As the years passed and he grew older, Nabors continued working, singing, and keeping the same warm, steady presence that fans loved. Behind the scenes, though, he had a long-term relationship that remained private. He and his partner built a life together quietly, without making any public statements or attracting attention. Their relationship lasted decades, steadfast, committed, and far from the public eye. Only in 2013, at the age of 82, did Jim Nabors finally decide to share the truth openly. By then, society had changed, and the entertainment industry had become far more accepting. Under this new, more understanding landscape, he married his partner of 38 years. It was a calm, simple ceremony, but a powerful moment in his life. After so long spent keeping his personal world hidden, he could finally acknowledge it without fear. Nabors' story shows the emotional cost of staying silent for so many decades. While audiences saw the cheerful, innocent Gomer Pyle, they never saw the quiet strength it took for Nabors to protect his truth during a time when honesty could have destroyed everything he worked for. His late-life openness became a gentle reminder that even the friendliest public figures often carry private stories shaped by the pressures of their era. Rock Hudson. Rock Hudson was the picture of a classic Hollywood leading man. With his tall frame, polished smile, and calm confidence, he became one of the most admired actors of the 1950s and 1960s. Audiences loved watching him joke around on The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson, where he appeared relaxed, charming, and completely at ease. For many viewers, he represented everything a movie star was supposed to be. But behind the polished public image was a much more guarded private life. The Hollywood studio system worked hard to control how its stars were seen, and Hudson was no exception. Throughout his career, he avoided talking about anything that could raise questions about his personal life. He kept relationships hidden, avoided interviews that went too deep, and relied on carefully managed publicity to maintain a clean, masculine image. As a result, he went through decades of fame without ever addressing the rumors that followed him. By the early 1980s, however, that silence became harder to maintain. Hudson's health began to decline, and the public noticed his sudden weight loss and frail appearance. At the time, the AIDS crisis was only beginning, and fear and misinformation were widespread. When Hudson finally announced in 1985 that he had AIDS, it shocked the country. He was 59 years old and only weeks away from death. Because he had always avoided speaking about his sexuality, the announcement opened the door to questions people had whispered about for years. Many finally acknowledged that the beloved movie star had been gay, something he never confirmed during his lifetime. His revelation, though forced by illness, became one of the first major moments in American pop culture in which a well-known celebrity was publicly linked to AIDS. It changed the national conversation overnight. Hudson's illness helped humanize the disease for people who previously saw it as distant or irrelevant. Reporters, doctors, and activists later explained that his case brought a level of visibility that public education campaigns had struggled to achieve. His condition made many Americans realize that AIDS could affect anyone, including the stars they admired. For Hudson himself, this was the very situation he had spent decades trying to avoid. He had built his fame on a carefully protected image, and revealing the truth was something he had always feared. Marlon Brando. Marlon Brando's name carried a certain power in Hollywood. When he walked onto talk show stages or appeared in interviews, audiences never knew what version of him they would get. Sometimes he arrived looking annoyed, sometimes thoughtful, sometimes surprisingly gentle. His reputation as a rebel was well-earned. He challenged directors, questioned studio rules, and lived according to his own shifting principles. Yet, when it came to sexuality, his approach was calmer and more honest than people expected from someone known for breaking every other boundary. In 1976, during a period of public reflection, Brando openly admitted he had experienced attraction to more than one gender. This admission arrived in an era when almost no major male star dared to say anything similar. Hollywood still depended heavily on rigid public images, and most actors stayed silent to protect their careers. Brando's comment, however casual it might have seemed, stood out because it was direct and matter-of-fact. He did not present himself as a spokesperson for a cause, nor did he stage a dramatic announcement. Instead, he treated the topic with a kind of shrug, as if honesty required no justification. Brando's comfort with complexity made sense in the context of his life. The 1960s and 1970s were years of cultural upheaval, and as he immersed himself in activism, political causes, and artistic experimentation, he had already grown used to challenging social norms. Even so, publicly acknowledging bisexuality still carried risk. The public did not yet know how to categorize such statements from a major leading man, especially one known for raw masculine roles. During his years appearing on The Tonight Show, viewers mostly saw the version of Brando that Hollywood preferred: enigmatic, charismatic, and impossible to pin down. But behind the scenes, Brando was less mysterious than he appeared. Friends and biographers later described him as someone who did not feel the need to hide his personal life from those close to him. His circle knew he had relationships with both men and women, and he rarely pretended otherwise in private settings. Actors, writers, and activists often recalled that Brando's openness in private matched the casual honesty of his interviews. He simply did not view sexuality as a rigid category. Part of this attitude came from Brando's distrust of Hollywood stereotypes. He knew the industry expected leading men to maintain a public image built on carefully controlled masculinity. But Brando had already rejected most studio expectations long before the 1970s. He had taken public political stances, turned down roles others believed essential for a successful career, and criticized Hollywood in interviews. By the time he addressed his own sexuality, he had spent years proving that he would not mold himself to satisfy public expectations. His activism also shaped his worldview. During the Civil Rights Movement, the Native American Rights Movement, and various humanitarian efforts, Brando surrounded himself with people who challenged traditional ideas. These experiences broadened his perspective and made him more comfortable discussing aspects of his personal life that others considered taboo. He understood that culture was shifting, even if slowly, and believed discussions about identity did not need to be sensationalized. When audiences look back at his talk show appearances today, they see a man who often played with the idea of public persona, sometimes withholding, sometimes revealing just enough to make people question what they thought they knew. His admission about his sexuality fits this pattern. Brando was not trying to shock. He was simply refusing to lie. In the end, his statement became one more example of how he challenged Hollywood without raising his voice, proving that even honesty could be a form of rebellion. Anthony Perkins. Anthony Perkins became a household name after playing Norman Bates in Psycho, a role that forever linked him to the image of a quiet, troubled young man hiding dangerous secrets. His shy smile and boyish appearance made him seem innocent on the surface, but his real life carried a secret far more personal than anything written in a script. Throughout the 1950s and 1960s, Perkins lived with the constant pressure of concealing his sexuality in an industry that punished even the slightest hint of nonconformity. Hollywood at the time demanded careful public behavior, and Perkins followed the rules. He appeared in promotional interviews, visited talk show stages, and acted every bit the rising star. On The Tonight Show, he presented himself as polite and charming, keeping conversations light. Nothing about his demeanor suggested the private emotional struggle he carried. Meanwhile, the studio system and gossip magazines carefully managed every detail about him, ensuring that audiences saw only the sanitized image of a young leading man. Behind the controlled publicity, Perkins lived a very different story. Later biographies and interviews revealed that he had been involved in a long-term romantic relationship with another actor, Tab Hunter. Their connection remained hidden not by choice, but by the strict culture of mid-century Hollywood. Even though many insiders suspected the truth, public acknowledgement would have ended both of their careers. To protect their futures, they maintained a careful distance in public and relied on secrecy in private. Perkins eventually married and had children, but even that part of his life did not erase the earlier years of quiet struggle. His diaries, published after his death in 1992, revealed the depth of his internal conflict and his frustration at living a life controlled by fear and limitations. He longed for honesty, but lived in a time that would not allow it. Additional accounts from co-stars and directors showed how carefully he guarded his private life. Perkins often avoided social gatherings and industry parties, fearing that even casual conversations might expose something he worked so hard to hide. His shy, nervous public persona, often interpreted as part of his charm, was partly shaped by years of emotional caution. He developed a habit of keeping people at arm's length, revealing little about himself beyond professional details. During his early career, studio executives even arranged carefully planned public dates for him, pairing him with actresses as a way to control the narrative. These outings were photographed and circulated in fan magazines, helping reinforce the illusion of a conventional Hollywood heartthrob. Perkins rarely complained and allowed the system to shape his image, knowing that resisting could cost him major roles. His later work, including his return to the Psycho franchise, showed a performer deeply committed to his craft. but privately, he continued to struggle with the tension between who he was and what the industry demanded. Friends noted that his personal relationships became more complex as he aged, especially as the AIDS crisis emerged and fear spread throughout Hollywood. Perkins' death from AIDS-related complications in 1992 became part of a larger story about the generation of actors Robert Reed. To most television viewers of the 1970s, Robert Reed represented the perfect American father. As Mike Brady on The Brady Bunch, he played the calm, wise parent who solved every family issue with patience and kindness. He carried that same composed charm onto talk show stages, including his appearances with Johnny Carson, where he joked lightly and fit the expectations placed on him as a reliable sitcom star. His public persona seemed complete, leaving no space for speculation about his personal life. Yet Reed's real experience behind the scenes was far more complex. While the public embraced him as the ideal dad, privately, he lived as a gay man in a deeply conservative era. The entertainment industry offered little room for honesty, especially for actors associated with wholesome family shows. Studio contracts and publicity teams controlled every photograph, interview, and promotional detail. Articles about his personal life were forbidden, and the pressure to maintain a spotless image left him isolated. Cast members later reflected on Reed's emotional distance. They remembered him as kind, but guarded, someone who kept personal matters strictly private. Barry Williams, who played Greg Brady, later admitted that Reed never discussed his personal relationships or identity with the cast. The silence was not coldness, it was protection. The culture of the time made any openness dangerous for a man whose entire career depended on appearing as the model father figure. After Reed's death in 1992, the truth slowly emerged. His estate confirmed that he had lived a closeted life and had also battled HIV AIDS, which he kept hidden until the very end. This revelation changed how many fans viewed his story. It became clear that while Reed played a warm and present father on screen, he carried loneliness and secrecy off-screen, shaped entirely by the expectations of the era. His legacy now shows the sharp contrast between Hollywood's public images and the private realities its stars were forced to endure. Reed's performance as Mike Brady continues to be loved by generations, but understanding the hidden burden behind it adds a new layer of empathy. His story is a quiet reminder of how often the entertainment world demands silence in exchange for stability, leaving personal truth hidden behind the glow of a television screen. Richard Chamberlain. Richard Chamberlain rose to fame in the early 1960s as Dr. Kildare, the television doctor whose calm voice and reassuring presence made him a national favorite. His popularity soared, and he quickly became one of the decade's most admired heartthrobs. Fans sent letters, chanted his name at events, and treated him as a romantic figure even off-screen. When he appeared on The Tonight Show, the audience saw a smooth, confident young actor enjoying his success. Behind this success, Chamberlain carried a secret that shaped much of his early career. Like many actors of his generation, he felt forced to hide his sexuality to protect his opportunities. Hollywood's expectations made honesty impossible. Publicists arranged narratives, managed rumors, and ensured the star appeared as the picture of traditional masculinity. Chamberlain went along with the system because resisting it felt impossible. The more famous he became, the more he felt trapped in the role of the idealized leading man. His private life developed quietly, away from cameras and public interest. Over the decades, however, the strain of hiding his identity wore on him. He later described those years as living in a double life, where professional success clashed with personal truth. Although society slowly changed during the 1980s and 1990s, Chamberlain remained hesitant to speak openly, fearing the potential backlash, even in a more accepting environment. Everything shifted in 2003 when he published a memoir revealing that he was gay. This announcement arrived long after his peak fame, at a moment when he felt safe enough to share what he had concealed for so long. The public response was largely supportive, showing how much the cultural climate had evolved. Chamberlain then appeared on morning shows and interviews discussing the pressures he faced and the emotional freedom that came with honesty. His confession marked the closing of a long chapter defined by secrecy. It also sparked conversations about how many actors of earlier decades had struggled quietly in similar ways. Chamberlain's story demonstrates how slowly Hollywood changed and how long it took for public acceptance to extend to the stars who shaped television history. His later life openness stands as a personal victory, after years spent navigating expectations that once left no room for the truth. Cesar Romero. Cesar Romero became widely recognized for his lively portrayal of the Joker in the 1960s Batman television series. With his colorful costume, dramatic gestures, and signature mustache, he created a version of the character that entertained both children and adults. He carried this same charismatic energy into variety shows and talk shows, including his appearances on The Tonight Show, where he impressed audiences with his humor and polished charm. Off-camera, Romero maintained a very different reputation, one that was unusual for the time. He lived publicly as a lifelong bachelor and chose never to enter a marriage, something that set him apart in a generation when many male actors arranged relationships to protect their images. Hollywood often encouraged marriages of convenience for gay men, offering a protective layer against gossip. Romero rejected that expectation entirely. He continued living openly among friends, without pretending to fit public norms, though he never made formal announcements about his personal life. Biographers later described him as someone who lived as a gay man, without trying to hide it from the people who knew him. He attended parties, social gatherings, and studio events without constructing elaborate cover stories. His confidence and comfort with himself allowed him a level of freedom that many of his peers did not have. Even so, he avoided discussing his private life in interviews, aware that open acknowledgement could have caused complications during the conservative 1950s and 1960s. Romero's refusal to participate in fake relationships became clearer through research and memoirs published long after his death. These accounts emphasized that while he enjoyed the glamorous Hollywood lifestyle, he lived it on his own terms, resisting the industry's pressure to present a false image. His bachelor persona, once treated as a playful quirk, later proved to be a quiet form of defiance against a culture that demanded conformity. In later years, stories from colleagues painted him as someone who found community in Hollywood's hidden social circles, private gatherings where actors, writers, and dancers felt safe from public scrutiny. Romero moved comfortably in these spaces, forming friendships that lasted decades. He also built a long career beyond Batman, appearing in films, musicals, and guest roles that showed he wasn't defined by a single part. His charm and professionalism earned him steady work at a time when many actors struggled to maintain relevance. His legacy now reflects an unexpected truth. While many stars of his era lived under layers of secrecy, Romero carved out a space where he could be himself, even if only indirectly. The man behind the Joker's grin managed to avoid the sadder stories of closeted actors by simply refusing to live a lie. His life stands as a reminder that quiet authenticity can be its own form of rebellion, especially in an industry built on illusion. Thanks for watching. If these revelations surprised you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your favorite hidden detail in the comments. More classic Hollywood secrets are coming soon.